So, if you watch literally any TV procedural, you probably think the criminal justice system is this nonstop thrill ride, right? You picture every single crime ending in a dramatic, nail biting courtroom trial with surprise witnesses and a gavel banging judge. But if we pull back the curtain, how many cases actually look like that? Well, today we're going to shatter a few of those Hollywood illusions.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are demystifying the front half of the criminal justice system. Over the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to break down the absolute key concepts of policing and the courts, focusing purely on the data and the actual daily realities that keep this massive machinery running.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the evolution of policing, then the reality of police work, followed by the power of discretion. After that, we'll cover strategies that actually work, the courtroom work group, and finally, pleas, trials, and sentencing. Section 1. The evolution of policing, from the night watch to data-driven forces. You know, it might actually surprise you to learn that modern, organized policing is a surprisingly recent historical invention. For most of human history, keeping order was just an informal community obligation. Think of it like taking turns on a neighborhood night watch. But the major turning point happened in 1829. That's when Sir Robert Peel persuaded the British Parliament to create the London Metropolitan Police, which was the very first modern, full-time police department. He set up a salaried force that was expected to prevent crime rather than just react to it after the fact. And interestingly, to get a highly skeptical public to accept a standing domestic force, Peel intentionally designed their uniforms to look like civilian clothing, not military gear. He knew that policing absolutely only works with public cooperation and approval, which leads us directly to his most famous enduring principle. The police are the public, and the public are the police. Now, over in America, things developed a bit differently, shaped heavily by local politics. American policing basically evolved through three broad eras. First up was the political era, starting in the 1840s, where police were tied directly to local political machines. There was a lot of social service going on, but also, frankly, rampant patronage and corruption. So to fix that, we entered the reform era in the 1920s. Figures like August Vollmer professionalized the force, put officers in patrol cars, and utilized radios. But there was a steep cost to this efficiency, and that was isolation. Officers were now zooming past neighborhoods with their windows rolled up, talking on radios instead of walking the beat, and they became completely separated from the community pulse. And that isolation directly prompted the community era of the 1970s, which focused on getting officers back out of the cars to rebuild those essential neighborhood partnerships. As you can see, every era is essentially a direct response to the specific failures of the previous one. Moving on to Section 2, the reality of police work, shattering the Hollywood illusion. Let's take that Hollywood illusion of nonstop action and contrast it with what officers actually do day to day. First off, there's no single police force in America. Actually, there are roughly 18,000 separate law enforcement agencies in the United States. 18,000. We're talking municipal police, county sheriffs, state highway patrols, and federal agencies like the FBI or DEA. This highly decentralized system means we heavily prioritize local control, which is great, but it also means we struggle massively with fragmentation. Just imagine 18,000 different databases that often can't even talk to each other. It creates massive jurisdictional friction and really inconsistent training standards across county lines. And this brilliantly illustrates a huge point. Notice how law enforcement, meaning actually detecting serious crime and making arrests, is by far the smallest category of an officer's day. The vast majority of a police officer's time is actually spent on order maintenance, like breaking up a loud party and service functions, like checking on elderly residents or directing traffic around a broken light. In reality, police are basically generalist problem solvers. They're dispatched to handle whatever society can't figure out on its own, and very often, that's at 3 in the morning. Section 3. The power of discretion, the system's invisible engine. Discretion is the absolute through line of the justice system. It's the single most important yet somehow least visible feature of police work. It's simply defined as the authority to choose among lawful courses of action. When an officer encounters a minor offense, they can warn, cite, arrest, or honestly just move on. And here is the great irony of the entire criminal justice system. The lowest-ranking members of the organization actually wield the absolute most discretion. A lone patrol officer makes unreviewable, split-second decisions at 3 a.m., often with zero direct supervision. So what exactly drives these choices? Well, the seriousness of the offense is the strongest factor for sure. Basically, the worse the crime, the less discretion an officer has. Strength of evidence and what the victim actually wants also play huge roles. But notice that fourth bullet point, suspect demeanor. If a suspect is hostile, they are far more likely to be arrested. Now, this raises massive fairness concerns because last time I checked, having a bad attitude isn't actually a crime. Discretion is necessary because it allows for human mercy, right? It can keep a teenager out of the system for a minor mistake. But it inherently risks bias. And that's exactly why modern agencies use body cameras and strict policies to structure discretion rather than trying to impossibly eliminate it altogether. This brings us to a really critical concept in modern criminology called procedural justice. Researcher Tom Tyler identified 4 key elements here: voice, neutrality, respect, and trustworthiness. If police give people a voice, act with neutrality, treat them with respect, and show sincere trustworthiness, people will judge the entire encounter as fair, even if they end up getting a ticket or are arrested. The psychology of this is just fascinating. Fairness in the process buys community acceptance and legitimacy that the outcome alone simply cannot. If the public feels the process is fair, they're way more likely to comply with the law long term. And legitimacy is a pure operational necessity, because if the public doesn't trust the police, they stop calling, and cases simply go unsolved.
All right, Section 4, strategies that actually work. Data over drama.
So, the crucial point here is that for a long time, we just kind of assumed that random preventive patrols and super fast response times reduced crime. But starting in the 1970s, researchers tested these assumptions and found they largely don't work at all. Most crimes are reported long after they happen, so shaving a minute off a response time rarely catches the bad guy. We had to find out what does work. Enter Herman Goldstein. He developed problem-oriented policing, which uses the SARA model: scanning, analysis, response, and assessment. Instead of just reacting to 911 calls at the same exact park every single night, police analyze the root causes of the recurring problem. Maybe the response isn't making more arrests, but rather teaming up with city planners to fix broken streetlights and trim back some bushes. It's all about crafting tailored, long-term solutions.
Today, modern policing relies heavily on these proven, evidence-based tactics. Community-oriented policing builds that essential trust we talked about. Problem-oriented policing addresses those root causes. Then there's hotspot policing, which focuses intense resources on specific, tiny microplaces that generate a disproportionate amount of crime. And focused deterrence targets the tiny fraction of people driving serious violence, offering them a mix of strict consequences alongside genuine social support. But remember, what works always depends on pairing these focused tactics with procedural fairness and community consent.
Section 5, the courtroom workgroup, the daily reality of justice. Once an arrest is finally made, a case enters our dual court system of state and federal courts, where a whole new phase of discretion basically takes over. TV always shows us the adversarial ideal, right? The prosecution and defense locked in fierce, dramatic combat before a totally neutral judge. But criminologists know the daily reality is actually the courtroom workgroup. Prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges actually work together every single day. They share professional norms and stabilize expectations simply because they have to manage massively overloaded dockets. I mean, picture a single public defender juggling over 100 active felony cases at once. Simply put, cooperation often has to outweigh combat just to keep the entire system from collapsing under its own weight. Section 6. Pleas, trials, and sentencing. The case funnel in action. The justice system is essentially a massive funnel. At every single stage, from arrest to bail to preliminary hearings, cases continuously drop out of the system. Now, what's really interesting about this is how those remaining cases are actually resolved. Forget that dramatic courtroom finale. The overwhelming majority of criminal convictions, roughly 90% or more, are obtained through plea bargaining, not open trials. The defendant agrees to plead guilty in exchange for a concession, like reduced charges or a much lighter sentence recommendation.
But this system absolutely has intense critics. Plea bargaining creates what is known as the trial penalty. This is the massive, sometimes terrifying gap between the sentence offered in a plea deal and the much harsher sentence a defendant will likely face if they go to trial and lose. Critics argue this process concentrates largely unreviewable power in the hands of the prosecutor. They also argue that the pressure of the trial penalty is so extreme, it can actually push even innocent people to plead guilty just to avoid a potentially devastating trial sentence.
When a conviction does happen, it leads to sentencing. And this is where theoretical criminology suddenly becomes very real, very concrete policy. Sentencing structures aim for a mix of competing goals. You have retribution, which is deserved punishment. Then there's deterrence, meant for preventing future crime.
Sometimes it's about incapacitation, to physically restrain the offender, or rehabilitation to try and actually change their behavior. And finally, restoration, which focuses on repairing the harm done to the victim and the wider community.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider this. From a patrol officer's choice to issue a warning, to a prosecutor's plea offer, to a judge's final sentence, discretion is the invisible thread tying it all together. The formal law sets the boundaries, sure, but human choices determine the daily reality. So if discretion decides what justice actually looks like, how do we effectively balance the need for human mercy with the demand for equal treatment under the law? It's the ultimate trade-off of the criminal justice system, and definitely something to keep in mind the next time you sit down to watch that TV procedural. Thanks for hanging out and learning with us today.